Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's event. It's Avoiding a Social Media Lawsuit, how Franklin, Indiana proactively responded when a neighboring county faced their own lawsuit. Now, this is Morgan Wright. I'm a senior fellow at the Center for Digital Government. I also happen to be an advisor for the U.S. Congress House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and I'm telling you right now, this is great stuff. I'm glad you guys are here to see this. We're going to have fun and have an informative session for the next 60 minutes. Now, before we begin, just a couple of brief housekeeping notes. We will make a recording of this presentation available, and we will email it to everybody within 48 hours. We want you to use it for your reference. Feel free to pass it to those folks who could not be here today. It's designed to be interactive, so down at the bottom you're going to see a Q&A button. Make sure you get us your questions, because at the end between Julie and Anil, who I'll introduce here in a minute, a lot of knowledge here. You want to take care of it, or you want to take advantage of that today. So make sure we'll get to as many as we can. We're going to do our Q&A at the very end, about the last 10 minutes. If you'd like to download a PDF of the slides, you can do so by clicking on the Webinar Resources widget down at the bottom of the console. Also, during today's webinar, you'll be able to connect with your peers via LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Just use hashtag GovTechLive. Let everybody know you are getting a bunch of fun education here today and good learning. So make sure you do that. And then at the close of the webinar, we encourage you to complete a brief survey about the presentation. We do want to hear what you think. We've actually made changes based upon the feedback from you, the folks who are listening here today. If you can't stay for the entire thing, just complete the survey. Just click on the survey widget again at the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, it'll pop up. So at this time, sit back, relax, strap in. We're going to have fun. Disable your pop-up blockers. And if you're experiencing any media player issues or have any other problems, visit the webcast help guide, or just click the help button at the bottom of the console, and Eddie from our crack staff at On24 will be there to help you. So now, let's get to the fun part. So joining me today to discuss this very timely topic is Julie Brashaber. She is the Director of Marketing for the City of Franklin, Indiana, and Anil Chawla. He is the CEO and founder of ArchiveSocial. But before we do that, real quickly, I'm just going to give you just a few of my own notes here. Then Julie's going to come on and tell you about avoiding a social media lawsuit. Anil's going to talk to you about the legal aspects of social media use, a lot of the risks that's involved, and then we're going to get to our Q&A. So here's the deal. Sometimes when we start talking about managing social media and all the things you have to do, a lot of people get it in their mind that it's calculus, that it's physics. Oh, this is going to be very tough. Well, folks, it's not very tough. A lot of this is just about good, solid policy, making sure you understand your policy, what it is, before you start applying the technology. But most of the time, the problem is not the technology. The problem is, yes, that's you folks. You get too scared of it, you fail to take the right action, or again, you fail to put the right policies, think through this in place before you start launching your social media channel. That's a lot of times when you get yourself into a little bit of a jam. But don't worry, folks. The way to fix it, it's actually very easy. Mullet dude there, he says, look, if this guy can do it, we know you can do it. All it takes is just a little bit of proactive learning. Learn some lessons from what you're going to hear today. And it's simple. It's just a few do's, a few don'ts. If you'll just get those things right, you'll eliminate a lot of the risk. You'll make it fun for people, and you'll turn social media into a very effective tool. And guess what? When you do all of this, you will turn yourself into a social media superhero, and I get the chance to interview our first and introduce you to our first social media superhero today. So let me present Julie Brashaber. She's the Director of Marketing at the City of Franklin, Indiana. Now, before I give you the rest of her great resume, we've got our first poll question here. So as you guys are voting on this, I'm going to read you the rest of Julie's bio, but let's ask you this. What is your opinion on social media as a public record? It is definitely a public record by law. It might be a record, but your activity isn't worth retaining. You feel strongly it is not a public record, or you don't know. So it's definitely a public record. It might be a record, but your activity isn't worth retaining. You feel strongly it is not a public record, or you don't know. Now, while you're voting, let me tell you a little bit about Julie. She serves as the Director of Marketing for the City of Franklin. It is a charming historic community located in central Indiana. In her current position, she specializes in social media management for all the city departments, content creation for the Indiana Franklin Tourism app, city marketing campaigns, and promotional materials. She's got a lot to do. And previously, she worked in various areas of digital and print advertising for Gannett Imaging Ad Design Center and marketing for Indiana Soccer, including the logo creation for the Indiana Futsal. She has a bachelor's degree in journalism, public relations, and marketing design from, guess where? Yes, Franklin College. So let's take a quick look at the results here. So it's definitely about 80% of you said it is definitely a public record by law. About 12% said it may not be a record, or you're not worth retaining. Only about 1% of you said it's not a record, and about 6% of you don't know. So, hey, that's a lot of good stuff. But the good thing, though, Julie, is we found out a lot of people think it's definitely a public record by law. So let me turn it over to you, Julie. The floor is yours.
All right, hello everyone. As he mentioned, I'm Julie Brashber, and I'm excited to be here today with all of you. I hope I can share some positive tips for being proactive and protecting your agencies on social media. A big part of my job is managing our city social media accounts and effectively responding to inquiries from our citizens. So just to give you an overview of our chat today, I just want to discuss how we are working to effectively get information out and engage with the public. I'll give some background on a lawsuit that was filed in a neighboring community and how that situation was handled. And then I'll go over what measures our city takes to keep an open dialogue with the citizens while protecting ourselves. Our social media policy, proposed policy will be made available for anyone interested, and I'll be happy to take some questions at the end. And so currently, we have, to start out with, 10 social media channels. We have 5 Facebook pages, 3 Twitter pages, 1 YouTube account, and 1 Instagram account. And our interaction levels vary on the different accounts, but our primary engagements from the public come from Facebook. And we have a primary Facebook for the city, police, fire, and our development corporation and our parks department. And each of these have different person managing the account, and we can talk about the pros and cons of that later because it could, have a disruption in the voice. So we want to make sure that we keep that consistent, and we can talk about that in a little bit. So our police department's Facebook page was actually created because of a police officer that felt it could be an opportunity to open a dialogue and engage with citizens. I'm sure that that would be true for a lot of other cities, and I completely agree that that should feel like a social media is a positive resource for government agencies. It can be used for tips to help solve crimes. And they'll feel more comfortable if they're just sending it to you in a social media message. And whether it's a good thing or not, people are getting their news from social media, especially their government news. And we have an opportunity to make sure the news people are accessing is correct and accurate information. We can get the pertinent information out to as many people as possible. And when we get that news out quickly, our citizens actually are helping us when they share it. So we find that sharing the post, it can reach a greater audience, and sometimes it can get our news out past our city limits, which is really helpful for anyone that might be coming into the city. They may have that news up front too. And so this news will show up on our timelines and feeds, and then citizens can respond. It's an open dialogue for us. It feels more relaxed and convenient for the user. But sometimes questions come in the form of a comment, and sometimes it's a comment on a post that's unrelated. Has it ever happened to anyone? I mean, it happens to us all the time. But we'll find that they'll send us a Facebook message, and it's not something pertaining to something we do, but they're hoping that we will give them the accurate information. So you can see here on this slide, someone's asking about the farmers market, which is something that is in the city, but it's not run by our agency. So we still try and give them the information and then tell them where they need to get more information. So we try and build that relationship by saying, hi, this is not necessarily one of our organizations, but we can guide you to the correct information. And we find our most frequent question that we get a message about is about what businesses are opening in Franklin. It's a big thing for us, and they'll send us a message, and they're always looking for an accurate, up-to-date list, and that's a way that we can always make sure that they're getting the up-to-date list. We find most of our young people in the community will communicate with us on Twitter. This may be true for your city too, but the information for the youth needs to be short, to the point, and not only because Twitter has a character limit, but we find a tweet will either be, it needs to be newsworthy or something that they can feel connected to. Pictures always have a higher engagement for us. Citizens may use them to communicate by tweeting, or have found they will actually use a hashtag to communicate with us. They'll sometimes send us a direct message, but most of the time they will tweet at us if they have a request. So to make sure that we're engaging with them on many different levels, especially because of the shorter attention span, we always keep it very newsworthy and positive. We try and do the power of positivity. We want all of our, if the subject matter is appropriate, we want it to be positive, or at least in a tone that's appropriate. So we're very careful of that. And depending on your frequency of social media usage or the popularity of a post topic, like as I mentioned, the upcoming businesses, there could be a thread of responses that happens for the next weeks or sometimes months later. We do our State of the City in February, and it is now May, and I occasionally get comments and questions about things that happened in the State of the City from the post that we posted in February. So that was quite a long time to be keeping up with that one post, and that's just one example. But we have events that come up, and we will have comments on that for months later. And I must say, the reactions aren't always positive or supportive. Sometimes that happens. You take the good with the bad, I guess. But our one neighboring community did have some responses that weren't exactly positive in their eyes, and so they got into a little bit of trouble. The neighboring city had a lawsuit filed against their police department and their police department Facebook page by the ACLU on behalf of two women who said that their comments were removed from the Facebook page. And so the comments were deleted because they were questioning or contradicting the post from the police department. And the city actually reacted and said that they claimed that the posts that were deleted were not related to the crime or they were untrue. And this happened about a week after I started working for the city, so it was very interesting to see how we responded. We luckily already had made the decision to invest in ArchiveSocial, so we were ahead of the game in the sense that we feel a little more protected than they may have in that instance. However, it's a very small community that had this lawsuit filed, and so it was published very heavily by every major news source in our area. And the comments were actually banned. They were banned from the page, so the users were actually removed. And so we have to remind ourselves that these posts, tweets, and comments are all considered to be an official government publication, and our citizens rely on this open form of communication. And so, unfortunately, the city actually ended up shutting down their police and city Facebook pages after only a few days at the advice of their legal counsel. The lawsuit was filed on June 29th, and actually the city page was shut down on July 6th, I believe. And unfortunately, these pages have not been reinstated. So before they shut it down, they said that they were losing their most effective tool for sharing information with their citizens. And that would be true for us as well. It would be a huge loss to the way that we communicate with the public. And so how do we protect ourselves in the event of a lawsuit, or better yet, prevent a lawsuit? How can we be proactive? The best response that I have is to create a social media policy and keep yourselves accountable. Don't delete comments just because you don't like what someone says. You may be able to do that on your personal Facebook page or Twitter page, but you're not able to do it on a government-owned page because that's the representation of the city. And so we are proposing a policy at our next board to approve our policy at the next Board of Works meeting, and it starts out in general kind of saying this is the department's official page and what department it is, and then it goes on to say a few more things about how we respectfully request that they are mindful that it's a family-friendly page. However, things will not be removed based on the opinion or viewpoint of the department. And so later, if you would like, I'm happy to share this copy of our social media policy if you're interested later. We can come back to that. And so I would just encourage you to create a policy. If you already have one, that's fantastic. But make sure everyone is abiding to the policy. We want to keep all the voices online accountable. My personal recommendation is to have a meeting with all of your social media managers to go over the policy and the details. And if you're lucky enough to have a marketing professional on your staff, maybe help create examples of tweets, posts, or photos. And that could be a great exercise or discussion about keeping a consistent voice on your accounts and overall help the brand of your agency. The policy is your tool to back up your actions on the account. So know it, love it, and fight it. And so there are a number of resources online that I just kind of wanted to talk to you about if you're starting from the beginning. And I would highly recommend, since we're talking about it today, using some resources on ArchiveSocial. It's been very helpful for me personally. They have excellent examples, guides, and case studies. And something that I found especially helpful, which you may hear a little bit more about later, was this interactive map. And so if you're not an expert on the laws in your state, the public record laws in your state, click on your state and you will find your reference to public record laws, social media policies and practices, and resource links available all in one place. So that's been very helpful for us. And then I would encourage you to remember your ABCs, and I won't yell it at you like Alec Baldwin does in this scene, but if you always A, B, C, compliant, be compliant with public record laws. And so I just have a question, and feel free to respond, just so that I can kind of get a feel for the audience. But how many social media managers do you have? I can kind of check as we go, but I'm trying to keep all of the voices accountable on our team, and we have quite a few voices, so it's nice to know where you guys are coming from. We have 4 main managers for our social media accounts, and as I mentioned, there are 10 accounts that we have currently. And I feel like this might be a little high, and so if I could encourage you guys to limit the number of voices, maybe do so. So one great thing about ArchiveSocial, though, is that we can keep all of our voices accountable by linking the account to the account owner. So whoever is primarily managing that account, we can kind of see, what they have been archiving. And so our dashboard, ArchiveSocial would be able to go over some options for your agency, but our agency chose to primarily just use it for recording purposes. We wanted to be prepared, but there are several other options that I would encourage you guys, if you were interested in it, to maybe check out with them. And so I can imagine sitting and scrolling through a Twitter feed if there was a public records request just to find something that happened over 6 months ago. Or I could look in our quick search digital records. That's been very helpful to us, especially when we do have different voices. It's really nice if there's a page that I don't manage that there's a request on, then we can possibly look that up. And so I gave an example of our mayor, and you can see how it looks when we pull up his information. Then we can find all the posts that just happened about our mayor. There's also an advanced search record, and you can narrow your search based on the date range or the search term. So I put in, let's see if anyone has been posting or what we have posted about the Greenway Trails, which is our trail system. And so you can see all of that information there. And we can also check the timestamp. So we can give a specific time for anyone who maybe has asked for a record of when this happened. We can give that as well. And so we have to remind ourselves that this is an ongoing process, and we have maybe put out a lot of social media. And so we want to make sure that we are on top of it at all times. And the goal is to prevent the record search from becoming a burden on you. We definitely do not want that to be a burden because we know you have other things to do. However, the citizens have a legal right to ask, and so to make the records available, this has just been an easy way for us to kind of keep ourselves accountable. It's not productive to spend our day searching or scrolling through an account to find something that maybe even happened in 2013. And so ArchiveSocial has been really helpful for us to make that process more efficient. And so as we remind ourselves that these might be considered government publications and that our citizens are relying on this form of communication, we can choose to schedule a recurring report, and that will help you keep track of your publications. And maintaining an effective government transparency and remaining compliant with public record laws also applies to social media channels. We have not had a social media lawsuit, but we feel protected with our archive system if that ever happened. Efficiently responding to public records requests, and then we can get back to keeping our citizens informed. And so I thank you for your time, and we're going to pass it back to Morgan. Thank you.
Well, Julie, fantastic job. We have a ton of comments coming in. So, yeah, and I've got it from here, so that's good. So here's what we're going to do, folks. So, hey, first of all, let's see. There we go. So let's get to Anil here. So, Julie, great job. In fact, if you go through there, you're going to see a lot of people talking about how many social media managers that have a surprise. Some people have as few as one, some as many as 10, one for each department. So I think that was a great question. So, folks, let me introduce you now to Anil Chawla. Anil is the founder and CEO of ArchiveSocial. But before I read the rest of his bio now, let's go to our final poll question here. We talked to you first of whether or not you thought social media is a record. Now let's say, how do you currently retain records of social media? So you're not retaining your records and you rely on the networks, which means Facebook, Twitter, things like that. It's old school. You take manual captures, screenshots, copy and paste. You use a personal backup tool like, say, Backupify or SocialSafe. You have an automated solution for archiving, or you're already a happy ArchiveSocial customer. So how do you handle or retain records of social media? You don't retain them and you rely on the networks. You take manual captures. You use a personal tool. You have an automated solution, or you're already a happy ArchiveSocial customer. So let me tell you a little bit more about Anil. It's always great when we get the founder and CEO on our webinars with us. He is the founder and CEO of ArchiveSocial. It is the public sector's leading provider of technology that helps agencies archive records and manage risk related to social media. Now, since 2012, ArchiveSocial has enabled hundreds of governments across entities from Elkhart, Indiana, to New York City retain records of social media for legal protection and public records requirements. And the company was recently recognized as a cool vendor in government by leading analyst firm Gartner and honored as a GovTech 100 company in 2016 and 2017 by GovTechnology magazine. And most recently, and folks, this is the really cool part, ArchiveSocial collaborated with the White House to launch a historic social media archive of the 44th presidency. So I think that's pretty cool, and we're going to see a lot more of that coming out here too. So let's go to let's go to the boards. So, Anil, 60% of people are retaining their records and relying on the network side. Folks, if you listen closely to Anil, he's going to point out to you some of the challenges with doing it that way. You take manual captures. Obviously, that's pretty time-intensive. 3% a personal backup tool, 10% automated, and 14%, almost 15%, a happy ArchiveSocial customer. But, Anil, I think that first one is one I think where I know that you're going to make the most impact on. So let me turn the floor over to you.
Well, Morgan, thank you so much for the introduction, and you're absolutely right. We will talk a bit about the need to retain records and how that plays into mitigating risk for your agency. But I first want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy Tuesday to tune in on this topic. Social media is obviously a very exciting medium for government. It's making a lot of impact, but government has always dealt with risk and policy issues, and in this event, a lawsuit. And so us getting to the core of this issue is what I'm here to do, is to talk about what's happening in the space. Julie presented that lawsuit out of Indiana. I also want to thank Julie for her overall presentation, really giving us insight into how your city has approached this issue and why you took action. And hats off to you on taking action. I think a lot of times we look at risk as something that's out there in the horizon, but the funny thing about risk is that you don't have a problem until you have a problem. And so, again, seeing what's happening to other agencies and not wanting to be that case study is a big part of this, and then certainly all of us helping each other to get in front of these issues so that hopefully over time these aren't really case studies, but just a normal operation as we have in government where issues come up and we can face the storm and move on. And what I want to do is actually take a step back. Julie did a really nice job there of talking about her needs and use cases. And along the way, you may have seen some glimpse of our product. I'm actually going to step out of that and really focus on the challenges that your agencies face day in and day out. And I want to be a resource to everybody that's tuned in today and talk more about these issues, the case studies we're seeing, and give you some higher-level guidance on how to approach managing your risk, regardless of which solution or technique you end up choosing. But I do want to arm everybody with that information so that you do have an action item or two to take away here so that you can be just as proactive as Franklin has been. So with that, I'm going to jump into this presentation, and where I want to start is in that first question around public records. Really nice to see that 80% of you view social media as a public record. Social media absolutely generates public records, but I know that there's still some confusion on that topic. About 20% of you, and most of that 20% was responding back saying that we're not sure that what we do on social media is creating real public record worth maintaining. And so I'll spend just a moment here on the law, the legal guidelines, and we'll get into some real-life examples. But when you step back and you look at the records law in your state, in this case I've pulled up Indiana since we're talking to Franklin today, but this is a records law that really is very similar in every state. Every state has a Public Information Act or an Open Records Act that basically says that a public record is created in relation to the transaction of business, so it's evidence of your agency's business, and it's classified as a record regardless of physical form. So what this means is that these laws that were written a very long time ago, well before social media, well before email, were really written in an open-ended fashion to account for however we might store that communication. So regardless of physical form, well, if you had a crime tip, regardless of that form, a crime tip is a crime tip, whether it came on a piece of paper, in an email, or a Twitter direct message, and it's certainly an important record. And so these laws have been in place. So one thing to really recognize here is that we're not waiting for new laws to spell out that social media is a record. The laws have been there. So the next question is, well, have states come around to the use of social media in government and really acknowledge that social media is a primary means of communication? And over the years, it's become very clear that social media is really playing an important role in how agencies communicate with citizens. And so we have seen the vast majority of states come out with guidance interpreting the existing law to say, yes, in fact, social media does create records that must be maintained. And again, in Indiana, sometimes this happens in a proactive fashion, sometimes it's reactive. In Indiana, well before this incident with Beech Grove, in 2013, there was actually a situation where Morristown had decided to remove content off of their Facebook page, and it was facing a complaint. And the public access counselor for Indiana wrote a formal opinion stating that social media does in fact create records, and then if there is a records request relevant to that information, it must be fulfilled. And so this is something that has been acknowledged in most states. And Julie mentioned the map, and I wanted to point you all to the map. So regardless of which state you're in, if you're not in Indiana, there is guidance out there for you today. So this is a map that we've put together by culling together the best practices and most recent guidance from the states. And I want to be really clear, while we are a private company, the information that we put on this map is not an opinion or something that we've generated about us. It's about you. So what we've done is we've gone out and found the latest guidance from each state, from the records bodies, the official guidance, and put it on a map wherever we could find it. And so when you go to go to your state here, you'll actually be able to see what we've put together, but then click back to the official guidance from your Secretary of State's office or your state archives. And so we are in a social media presentation. If you wanted to go check this out right now, there's a bit.ly for it, bit.ly/SM public records. And hopefully that's a good resource for you. So that's the academic side of it, well, the guidance, the law. I promised real-life examples, so that's what I want to get into next. And so let's talk about this notion that the law says it's a record, but are we creating records? Well, what I want to do is present just two very simple examples of where social media creates records. These are not all-encompassing, but they hopefully set off some light bulbs for all of you entertaining that question. And the first situation is one where social media is critically important. It's the emergency situation. And I've highlighted a tweet that was a deeply impactful tweet out of a really large-scale crisis, and really one of the most troubling events that we faced last year in the country with the mass shooting in the city of Orlando. It was the worst mass shooting in the history of the United States. But it does, a silver lining on this is it highlights how communication has evolved in government and how important social media is in a time of crisis and how effective it can be. And so when the mass shooting unfolded, the Orlando PD was very smart to get on Twitter and put this out, saying that all official updates would come on their Twitter account, requesting that there were no email or phone calls coming in, because in a crisis you can be inundated with all of the questions coming in. And they used their Twitter account very well to communicate to the public and the journalists what was happening to ensure safety, keep people away from the area of shooting, and provide a level of transparency that we frankly haven't had in the past prior to social media. And so this crisis situation really highlights not only the importance of social media in general, but the importance of the communications. These tweets, these are tweets. These tweets were the official communications of the crisis. And of course these are records under records law. And if you step back from this, and again, hopefully none of you deal with a crisis of this magnitude, but you do deal with emergencies and crisis situations day in and day out, whether that's a crime or perhaps it's just a weather event. social media is being used to communicate in the time of crisis or emergency in real time so the information can get out, and of course it's generating records of real value. So if you're out all on social media, you're very likely to utilize social media in this fashion when needed. Now, outside of that public safety emergency scenario, day in and day out, it's important to reflect on how social media is being used, and Julie touched on this quite a bit with her examples. Citizens have questions. They have questions about the events that you have in your community. They have questions about the ordinances. They have questions about the services that are being provided. And that conversation in and of itself generates important records. So you may be reposting information that's available elsewhere and thinking that, okay, this is not necessarily a new record, but social networking is all about that social side and being social with an open network of people. And the moment there is communication back and forth and clarification, you're certainly generating new records. And this is an interesting example, just sort of a randomly picked example out of the city of Austin, where a citizen reported a sidewalk that had not been taken care of in terms of the grass being mowed. And the Austin Code Department has found that social media is a more effective way to address this issue, responding back and actually asking for photos of the citizen complaint. And that's how social media should be used, but of course these are records. Now, this may never lead to a legal incident, but you certainly want to have your bases covered because, again, legal incidents are always unpredictable. So I encourage all of you to take a look at your social media presence, scan through the last week or two of your Facebook pages, look at the questions, comments coming in, look at the information that you're disseminating, and decide, is there unique information here in relation to the business of our agency? And if so, you likely have records that must be retained. The next question is, well, why retain them yourself? Who's asking for them? Why is this necessary? And it fundamentally does come down to either public records requests or legal requests for your information. Now, I have an example on the screen of a tweet from 2014. This is 3 years ago now, where a citizen actually tweeted at Seattle PD asking Seattle PD to provide the archives of all of their Twitter feeds. And he said, please consider this a Public Records Act request. So 3 years ago, he made a public records request for social media using social media. So I would say that this is a sign of the times, but this is a sign of the times 3 years ago, and certainly we've seen this happen more and more with citizens specifically requesting social media as a public record. Now, in this incident, Seattle did respond back saying, you need to go fill out our public records form on our website. You can't just tweet a records request at us. But your desire to have records of social media is valid, and we'll fulfill that. So this is something to look out for. Now, your agency may not have received a specific request for Facebook or Twitter today. While we're seeing that increase, that actually isn't where we see the bulk of records requests involving social media. Really where we're seeing requests for social media is out of requests that you've always gotten. Requests like all notifications of the street closure or all emails and communications between X and Y person. Right, these are the kinds of requests you're used to that obviously involved your email for a long time now. But now that social media really touches everything you do, these requests more and more involve social media. But again, particularly around things like street closures where in the middle of bad weather you might be providing clarifications and updates on your Twitter feed or Facebook account. So it's important, again, to introspect and say, when we get these records requests, should we have been including social media in this? And again, more and more the public and the journalists are recognizing that the important information is inside your social media accounts more so than your website. So that's where this is coming together, and I wanted to really put this all in one place in terms of a handful of case studies to say, okay, here's the law, here's the types of use of social media can generate records requests, here's the kinds of records requests that might come in, and then I want to talk to you about a few incidents that we've encountered where records requests have actually happened, and really take this to Julie's point about having an archiving system in place, some method of record keeping to your policy to really protect your agency. And the first case study I have is out of Florida. Florida is the Sunshine State. There's a lot of public records precedent there. But this one in particular I think really highlights an issue that a lot of agencies are struggling with around citizen comments and policy, to the exact story and point that Julie had in her presentation. And so what happens in this incident is that a citizen was actually repeatedly posting, promoting their own blog, which was commercial in nature, on the city's Facebook page. And the city did have a clear policy up in place, but the citizen was violating it. And so the city decided to remove that individual's posts and comments. The citizen then complained saying, hey, you cannot remove my commentary because this is Florida and we have a valued records law and you can't just delete information like this. Well, the city is archiving with us, and so responded back saying, well, actually, we do have all of the records of everything you posted, but you're violating our policy, which says we can remove. Then the citizen came back and said, well, I think you're singling me out, and actually issued a public records request for the last few months of Facebook content saying, in the last few months, I want to see everybody's posts that you've hidden or removed to see if I'm the only one. And so this is, again, something that could be a massive distraction. Could take a lot of time for an individual to go back and try to figure this out. It could be error-prone. You could miss something. You could make mistakes. But because the agency was already archiving, they said no problem. They went in the system, ran a search for everything that had been deleted or hidden, hit the export to PDF button, and sent over a PDF, and proved that they had a policy in place, that they were following that policy, and they're following it consistently. And that's what weathering that storm is all about, doing the things you're supposed to be doing so that this doesn't become a problem and impede your use of social media. On the opposite side of the country, there's the general challenges of citizens making requests, and of course you want to fulfill those, but oftentimes agencies say, well, we'll do our best to fulfill the records request, but if we can't necessarily get everything, then we did the best we could. Well, that's not really where you want to be, because the initial request can really turn into something a lot bigger. And so if you look across the country at Santa Barbara, this is actually about 2 years ago as well, where the city was implementing their gun buyback program, which is something the city decided to do. And it was obviously a controversial program. And while they were promoting this program, they were getting lots of questions and commentary on social media. A lot of clarifications were happening. And they received a records request from the National Rifle Association. So that's an association that has a lot of, excuse my silly pun, a lot of firepower behind them. And this is where you want to respond to that records request accurately and completely. And the good news is that Santa Barbara had been kicking the can on this issue for a long time before this. They had known that archiving was important, but they weren't taking action. They finally decided to start a free trial of our product, and this records request came in 3 weeks into their free trial. So a really great test case for them to see if they wanted to move forward having this records request from the NRA, which they were able to respond back to. Nothing else came out of it. And that's, again, the position you want to be in. But if you look at this case study, the officer talks about how he was really sweating bullets, worried about how will I get this information if I had to do this myself? What if I make a mistake? What could this lead to? But with an archive in place, the city had really fulfilled their obligation and, by the way, was able to run another gun buyback program a few weeks later. So that's the position that you want to be in. I'm going to give you one more case study just to talk about how important this issue is. And this is just to underscore that social media is so important to everything that happens in government, including at the level of the presidency. And so Morgan touched on this in my bio, but when our 44th president, President Barack Obama, was leaving office, one of the top priorities for the internal communications team in the White House was to ensure that the president was fulfilling his public records requirement, the Presidential Records Act. And so we have actually published a case study about this as well, where we talk about the importance of record keeping of social media and how these were really critical records for the President of the United States. And in fact, this is one of the last things that the White House staff worked on before they left office, was to ensure that this information was preserved. And I want to mention this as well because as a citizen of the United States, if you're interested in the history of a presidency, we worked with the White House to launch the first open archive of presidential social media, where you can access 8 years of content of more than 250,000 posts from the president, the first lady, the vice president, and about 100 other staff members, and see a social media archive in action recounting the history of our country. So with all of that, I promised that I would give you some, make this actionable for you. I hope that I've made a clear case to you on social media being a record, your agency needing to think about this, obviously with what's happened in Indiana and other parts of the country, wanting your agency needing to get ahead, and archiving, record keeping, and having the right policy in place being fundamental to protecting your agency. I want to deep dive a little bit more on social media archiving, and I want to give you a really clear picture of why this is important and why it's also kind of a hairy problem. So one of the things that we haven't addressed yet is the second poll talked about how many people are archiving. I was actually really excited to see about 40% of you are doing something to keep records on your own. Again, kudos to all of you who have taken action, but 60% of you are relying on the social networks. And while that's not the worst thing in the world, we hope that the data is there. I want to talk to you about why it's important to take a step forward in getting this information in your control, and why you can't rely on the social networks long term. And so the first question here is, why can't I rely on the network? Doesn't Facebook have my data as long as I don't delete it? Well, we actually ran a study on this last year where we sampled 400 government Facebook pages over the course of 1 month. Our technology can not only archive, but it can also detect deletions across social networks, and we ran this on Facebook. And in that 1 month, we found that the 400 pages had nearly 8,000 records of communications deleted off of Facebook. Now, once that information is deleted, it's gone. There's really no way to retrieve it. In fact, if you go to Facebook's website for law enforcement, Facebook says, law enforcement can subpoena us for this data, but please do so before it's deleted. So these deletions are a real problem. And when you look at this data and break it down, what we found here is that while not every page had a deletion, 3 out of 4 did. And so almost everybody's affected, 3 out of 4. And some of these pages had dozens of deletions in just that 1 month. And now when you go talk to these agencies, you say, why did you delete dozens of comments and communications? They'll say, we didn't. In fact, most agencies we work with have a policy to never delete. Maybe you hide, but not delete. It turns out that your citizens are deleting quite a bit. And again, what your citizens say to you, those communications received, are just as much public record as anything else. And they may have information that's real record value, crime tips, complaints, along those lines. And it's really surprising when we ran this, even as an archiving company, to see how much of this data is going away. So you do have to get this information in your control. And while you can take screenshots, that's not really a technique that's going to hold up over time. It's really a stopgap, because screenshotting is very time consuming, and you can't anticipate all of these deletions. So you do need archiving technology. So how do you think about archiving and finding a solution? Well, I really want to be clear about this challenge and give you some guidance on what to look for. So imagine the scenario of looking for an archiving solution. Hopefully I've convinced you that you need to find some solution. And you go out to the market and you find 2 different options. We'll call them option 1 and option 2. And both options say that they capture data from Facebook. So you're thinking about, well, how do we get compliant with our use of Facebook? Both options capture data from Facebook. I guess which one do we pick? And the reality that I want to share with you today is that it's not this simple. In fact, the answer depends on how compliant do you want to be. Why is it not as simple as capturing data from Facebook? Well, let's walk through an example. Yeah, and so, in fact, if you were to set up these 2 solutions together on your Facebook page and watch them archive for a week or so, you'd actually find that they have a varying degree of capture and ability to protect you. So they're really like apples and oranges. And so the example I have here actually steps out of Facebook and steps out of Twitter. We know those are the primary networks, but it's important to think about social media as a wide platform with different networks that keep changing over time. And so I took this example from Instagram, and I'm going to walk through this step by step to demonstrate what happens on social media and why archiving is such a challenge. So imagine that this is a post that your city has put out about vandalism in a park, asking for crime tips, who might have done it, or if anyone has information related to this incident. You put it on Instagram. Maybe you get a comment right away that's just acknowledging that this was terrible. And then this post sits here for a long time. Now imagine months go by, let's say 9 months go by. A citizen can come back and comment on this later. And in fact, in this incident, a citizen comes back and says, actually, this happened again. And there's another citizen with photos of it. Now, the other citizen, seeing that he was mentioned, responds back saying, yeah, but I had nothing to do with this. Please don't call me out on this government page. And so this conversation starts to unfold, and he says, Trailblazer64, I'm just taking pics, don't call me out. Trailblazer64 decides, okay, this person doesn't want to be called out, goes back and edits his comment. And then the great Jackson K, who didn't really want to be mentioned here, sees that he's no longer being mentioned and deletes his comment. So this is a conversation that unfolds really out of your control as a city. It happens way after the post that you created. And not only are there new comments, but the comment's edited and it's deleted. And this is something that's very dynamic, and it's happening really on its own. And this is really the reality of social media day in and day out. So how do you archive this, and how do you do it in a way that protects your agency? Well, there's a number of questions that you have to consider. So the first is, did you capture this conversation quickly enough as it unfolded, or did you just happen to capture one snapshot of it that didn't really that doesn't really frame exactly what happened here. Well, ideally, you captured it very quickly as it happened so that you got all the information. When you captured this, did you capture it in an authentic fashion, which means did you have that complete electronic record with metadata? Did you have all of the information you need? And if you're not familiar with metadata, it's basically an aspect of the electronic record that has been proven out to be as part of the public record and something important for agencies to capture. And once you have these records, if this was related to the crime and was to go to court, would this information actually hold up? Is your record-keeping approach something that is viable as legal evidence? I mentioned that this is a post that you put out 9 months ago and then finally got a comment. Does your record-keeping approach, is it able to keep up with all of these changes across the history of your social media and capture something that was really old, getting a new comment on it? Did it capture the edit? Did it capture that deletion? What happens if your archiving technology or the tool you're using tried to get the data but the social network was temporarily down? Or what happens if Instagram later changes something? We all know that Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, these sites change things all the time. So all of this is very dynamic, right? Social media is very dynamic, both in the way the communications happen and also in how the social networks work. And then finally, imagine that you somehow got all this data. How do you accurately reconstruct it? How do you replay this conversation in the way that it unfolded so that it would make sense to someone requesting it, so that you're not having this costly back and forth with an attorney? How do you just make this make sense? Right, these are the real challenges when it comes to archiving social media. And the big takeaway with all that, I asked a lot of questions there, is that fundamentally social media and social networks are really not made for archiving. So how compliant you are really depends on how well your archiving solution or your approach to record keeping overcomes these challenges and limitations. So this goes back to the apples and oranges. How do you decide what to pick? It's not just about grabbing data from the network and checking a box. It's really about understanding whether that archiving solution is keeping up with social media, the way it changes, and positions you to be able to produce the record. So here's a few questions or a few points to remember. Remember that compliance is not an on-off switch. Again, it's not as simple as just grabbing the first thing you see that grabs data. You do have to pay attention to all these details I mentioned, right? This is an Instagram post with a photo. You have comments coming in. They're being edited. And really, if you're really not sure if a solution has you covered, the best thing to do is just to test drive it. Let it run on your social media sites for a few days or a few weeks. Be aware of the lowest common denominator approach. What I mean by that is that it can often feel convenient to find technology that does many different things in one out of one box. So you may find archiving technology that archives websites and archives social media and archives email and it does it all. But what you'll find with a lot of these approaches is that they have a lowest common denominator approach where they do get some of that data, but really it's not as complete as you would want on all angles. Maybe that solution's really good at archiving websites, but the social media side of things is treated kind of like a website, and it doesn't have that full dynamic nature of social media. Maybe it's not authentic in the capture. Maybe it's really hard to search and produce it in the way you'd produce social media. So be aware of that, and again, it goes back to test driving a solution if you're concerned about that. Remember that archiving is about producing data. It's not just about storing it. So one of the things you should do when you're evaluating different approaches and solutions is ask for an output from the system. And not just a simple output, but imagine you're producing records off of a long conversation where some of the comments are relevant, some of them aren't. How does that solution reconstruct that social media conversation in a way that makes sense and provide you the information you need? And finally, in government, one of the best things we can do is learn from each other. And so a lot of agencies have tackled this issue, so it's really important to understand what they've done in terms of research, the experiences they've had with a solution running in place for months or years, and really take that to heart, because oftentimes you don't know what you're missing until you're missing it. And so it's really important to do that research and not reinvent the wheel. And finally, you're on this here today participating in this conversation with us, so you've obviously recognized that this is something important for you to understand for your agency. But when it comes to archiving, one of the things I want to point out is that historically archiving is something that IT would drive, or perhaps a records manager. Social media is quite a bit different because we found more often than not, social media is really driven by people in communications or in public information. You don't need IT to set up a Facebook page for you. You can just do it yourself. And so if you're at all involved with the use of social media, then you certainly play an important role in fulfilling this public information requirement, and encourage you to drive this forward and take this to IT, because this may not even be something that IT is thinking about yet or legal is thinking about, because they may not be as close to social media. They may not understand how impactful social media is for you today. So I'm going to wrap up here. One thing I want to mention, we are an entity that provides commercial services, but I want to call this out because we do also have a pro bono offering around the crisis situation. As I said in the beginning, oftentimes where you create records of value is in a crisis or an emergency. And the number one thing that we want to see is that we want to make sure that agencies are able to use social media in crisis, because it does make the difference between life and death. It does protect your citizens. And so whether or not you have archiving in place or not, we encourage you to use social media. And if you don't have an archive in place at the time of a crisis, go to this website and submit a request, and within 24 hours, we'll approve and provide 100% free access to our technology for 30 days to get you through a crisis, ensure that you have all the record keeping you need in case there are records requests or legal situations, because oftentimes you do face those records requests in legal situations due to a crisis. And we want to make sure you're protected whether or not you're a customer of ours in the time of need. So take a look at that if needed. And here's my contact information if I can be a resource to anybody that's tuned in. And I'm going to hand back to Morgan for questions.
Hey, thanks, Anil. And folks, we're getting a lot of requests, and don't worry. Remember, webinar resources, bottom of the console, download PDF slides. We'll also send you a link to this within 48 hours. We're getting a ton of questions. So here's what I'm going to do, folks. We probably have more questions than we can get to, so I'm going to dive right into it with Julie. Julie, first question for you. I'm going to start bundling a couple of these together. So we actually had Paola Laverta, I think, California Department of Industrial Relations, saying, great question, too. Besides not erasing comments, what other pitfalls should we avoid? So in your position, what are some of the pitfalls you want to try to avoid in addition to not erasing comments?
So just as a general recommendation, we find that we want to make sure that our employees are acting appropriately. And so do not engage or try to avoid engaging in arguments, or at least not use any offensive language that might reflect poorly on our organization. And then another pitfall may be, if there is a mistake, be upfront about it. Do not lie or try and hide something that was a mistake, just because if someone is able to take a screenshot of it before you were able to delete it, then they may be able to see it. So I know that that kind of falls into the deleting, but just being upfront about our mistakes and indicate if you have altered a post may be an appropriate route.
Oh, great. Hey, and Anil, for you, kind of playing off of that a little bit, I'm going to wrap up about 3 or 4 questions all in this one. So it's about, Facebook messages being deleted. We had some questions. I know we couldn't do a live demo to say, hey, can you show us unhiding it? But how long do these things stay? How long does ArchiveSocial keep them? And then what platforms do you cover? Because we're getting a lot of questions about how long does it stay once it's deleted, what other platforms do you cover, a lot of things around archiving and deletion of messages. So if we could wrap that up for you, Anil, and have you knock that one out of the park for us.
Sure thing. A lot of questions on that, as you said, including how long is a post available until Facebook deletes it. And I want to be really clear about this. Facebook's generally not the one deleting these records. It is important to state that Facebook does not in any way guarantee that they will keep it either. So if Facebook decided to delete your contents from 3 years ago, they could. There's nothing that prevents them from doing so. But what we're seeing more often than that is that citizens delete all the time. And we have had instances where citizens will share a crime tip. I use that example a lot, but we've actually seen that where a citizen will share a crime tip and then delete it. And there's no how long until that happens. It just happens when it happens. It could happen within moments of the citizen posting it. So one of the things that you want to look for there is a real-time or near real-time capture of information. Capturing social media once a day or once every few hours just really won't cut it. It increases your window of data loss. And in terms of how long do we keep it, well, we're an archive. We'll keep it indefinitely. Certainly in government, you can set disposition times on records based on the content, saying, well, we only want to keep this content for 3 years or 5 years. And so we do have functionality around that where you can dispose, but by default, we keep it forever, regardless of what happens on Facebook, because that's our role as an archive.
And Anil, just play off that real quick. There was one question about which platforms do you cover? I know we've talked about Facebook and Twitter, but there are also some others that ArchiveSocial covers.
Sure thing, and it's a good test for me to rattle them all off because we are entirely dedicated to social media, so we try to cover all of the key platforms: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, Flickr, Google+. We have Periscope capture, and on and on, so I probably missed one or two in there, but 9 or 10 different of the key platforms. And the question about detecting deletions, so one thing is, where do we capture deleted content? Well, once the content is deleted, it's already too late. So to capture deleted content, you have to simply capture really fast. What we provide is near real-time capture across all of the platforms. Facebook is a platform that delivers content to us, but not all of them do. So we try to do the best you possibly can to get that information in your control within minutes. Now, in terms of detecting deletions, that's also a challenge that a lot of vendors struggle with. We have come out with technology that will determine that something has been deleted across all platforms as well. And so we are seeing more and more records requests come in around, show me what you've hidden or deleted, and our technology does make that a lot easier by detecting that information. So that's a simple search for you to be able to produce it.
Great. And Julie, this one's for you. Diana Cleland, Hamilton County, Indiana. Sounds like a neighbor to you. Asking about, do you allow your social media editors to delete posts that are off topic? I don't remember if you said if you had more than you, but I mean, things that are off topic, how do you handle them per your social media policy?
So in our policy, we ultimately try and keep the post. If you have to hide it, maybe that's one thing. But if it's violating the policy, then it's able to be deleted. But if it's just off topic, if it's something related, and it's something maybe you don't like, then no, we still have to keep that, just so that, maybe it comes up again. We want to know what that was a reference. So our policy is to keep it unless it violates the policy directly with one of our listed violations.
Right. That gets into, I want to play off of what you said right there, and then I'm going to ask Anil to join in on this too, because it comes from M. Secris. I'm not sure if I got that right, from Sanford, maybe Florida. But asking, what's a good definition for reputational risk? Because I think you hit upon that early, Julie. Like, if you delete it or you're not transparent about it, that can come back to hurt your reputation, so that when you do put out information later, it can affect your credibility. So when you look at your reputation and the risk to your reputation, do you have a good definition? Is that's the question, or do you have another way of approaching that? Like, how do you ensure your integrity and your reputation online? And I think you're hitting on a couple of the things like transparency. Can you expand on that just a little more?
Well, I think just our reputation is, we want that to be seen. We want that to be visual and for you to be able to look it up. How we handle things, we want that to be available. And so if there's a comment, then we will always try and answer it on the page instead of doing a direct message. Unless it's more appropriate for us to do a direct message, we always try and have it out there. So we want to be as transparent and open as possible visually for everyone to see at any given time. We would like to avoid you having to do a public records request because you can see it.
And
does that answer your question?
One of the things that we talked about. Oh yeah, that's great too, because that gets into your view, and then and I know, Anil, you've worked with a lot of agencies. What has been one of the factors that has actually impacted their reputation? You talk about managing risk, and then there's also a reputational risk. What are a couple of things that you've seen that have actually negatively impacted agencies, or things that might have positively helped that they did right?
Well, Morgan, I think Julie covered it really nicely in terms of making information available. It does play with transparency. One that comes to mind right away that has been a really major theme is responsiveness. And so it could be both positive or negative in terms of how responsive you are, right? And so if you're not responsive, the conversation can get out of your control. People can think that you're not really listening, and so on and so forth. And so that's a potential risk to your reputation. And we've seen that agencies that have adopted an approach of being extraordinarily responsive, even if it's criticism, even if it's negative, coming back and saying, we've heard you out, even if you're going to remove, saying, we appreciate your participation here, but your comment is off topic per our policy, so we're going to remove it. Just being a part of that conversation, knowing that you're there, is really important. People want to know that they're being heard, and then, of course, if you can provide that next step for them, ideally on social media, maybe it's pointing them to the information they're looking for or asking them for a clarification on social, that really takes you to the next level. So we've seen a lot of agencies succeed with that approach. And then it has this really amazing network effect, again, with social media. That's the promise of social media, that network effect, is that when agencies are very responsive and involved with the conversation, the other citizens get involved too. And so a lot of times we've seen that there may be a troll on your social media stirring up some controversy, and if you're a responsive agency that's created a strong positive perception, maybe before you can even respond, your other citizens will jump back in and they have your back. And that's sort of the holy grail you try to get to. So again, really paying attention to that. And we've seen Facebook, just on that note, come out with this responsiveness indicator on private messaging to show how responsive you are. So that's one thing you can pay attention to. And second is that we have created technology, this is something that a number of our customers use, that monitors your page for interesting topics or questions coming in and alerts you as soon as you have a question, so that you're not having to watch your feed all day, but when someone's asking a question, you're aware of it and you can act on the things you care about. So there's different ways that you can address that responsiveness issue.
And I like that. That all goes back to reputation. So, folks, we've got time for one more question, and I get to pick the last one. And I think this is very interesting because when I was a state trooper and a detective, as they say back in the day, there was no social media. We didn't have the chance to post pictures. And Zachary Brack at Hall County Fire Services says, what are your thoughts on posting incident information and photos for public safety incidents such as fire? I think that's such a great thing because you can't control what the public does. I know there's been a lot of bad things happen because there have been people who have seen their family members in a wreck before they were even notified. So, Julie, what are some of the policies between police and fire that they have, or how do you approach posting incident information or public safety incident information?
That's a great question. I think it's sometimes the case-by-case basis, but ultimately we want to protect the person's information. And so I think we post the pertinent information about the case, but I think it would be great for your policy, to notify family members if you can before, especially in that event. If there was a fire and you found out on social media that your family was involved in a fire before you'd even heard from them. So I think that you handle it case-by-case basis, but always try and be proactive and get ahead of something and contact the right people, or just make sure that you're being careful about how you're phrasing it or how you're putting the information out there. We have at the end of our police department policy that everyone is considered innocent before being proven guilty on our policy. So anyone in a police department photo is still considered innocent until proven guilty.
Right, and look, we could go a long ways with this. We still have more questions. Folks, I'm sorry I cannot get to them, but we promised you we're going to try and end this right at 60 minutes. We're just a minute over. So first of all, what I want to do is say thank you to Julie Brashber from Franklin, Indiana. Great job, a lot of good information. Also, thank you to Anil Chawla. Always great, and we love partnering with these folks because, folks, it takes a partnership to bring this to you. So we want to thank our sponsor, ArchiveSocial, for helping us bring this to you. Remember, in 48 hours, you're going to get a link to everything. Click webinar resources down at the bottom. You can download a PDF of the slides. I know some people were looking for quotes and things. Make sure you get it out there. And I want to thank you folks for joining and partnering with us and ArchiveSocial to bring this information to you today. So I want everybody to have a safe afternoon, an enjoyable one, and we hope to see you on another Government Technology webinar soon. Everybody have a great afternoon, and thank you.